Okay, so I think we're going live now. Good morning. We're just testing things out. We'll be live in a few minutes. Good morning. We're just testing things out. We'll be live in a few minutes. Good morning. Welcome to today's live session. My name is Beth, and I'm part of the Student Academic Success team at Ambrose University. At Ambrose, we believe that education is about holistic transformation. We're here to help you develop academically, socially, professionally, and spiritually so that you can live to your greatest potential. Today, we want to talk about how you can grow professionally as you study here at Ambrose. We had a previous session on this topic called Planning for Today's Job Market. And in that session, we discussed how for most of us, our career paths aren't straight and narrow. In many cases, we find that there are changes in the job market, as well as changes in our own needs and passions throughout our career. So we may find ourselves going in some surprising directions throughout our career journey. In fact, many of us have probably already changed our minds at some point about what we want to do. Some people find that they know what they want to do from the time they're 3 or 4 years old. Other times, we change our minds along the way. We find that we change our ideas of what we want to do depending on our stage in life. Sometimes we also find that the world changes around us, and our job search strategies certainly need to change as the world around us changes. And that might depend on the tools that are available to us. There are job search tools available now that weren't available 5, 10, 20 years ago. It also depends on the kinds of jobs that interest us, and we may need different job search strategies depending on what career options we're pursuing. For instance, when I applied for my first job, I walked into the place and physically handed in a resume and cover letter. My cover letter and my resume listed a few volunteer opportunities I'd had, but I didn't have a lot of professional experience at that point. And I managed to get a job. However, at this point, if I were applying for roles in my professional field, I would need a much more developed resume and cover letter. And also the world around me has changed. Probably I wouldn't walk into somewhere and hand them a resume and cover letter by hand. Likely I would be applying online. Today, we'll be talking about some of those, how we might need to prepare ourselves now for our professional job applications, and how you can put together a strong job application package for your professional job searches. Now, if you're attending this session live, we would love to get to know you a bit and to know a little bit about your career journey so far. So please take a moment to sign into YouTube and introduce yourself in the live chat. We'd love to know your name, your program of study at Ambrose, and then perhaps just for fun, what you thought you wanted to be when you were a kid. I think I wanted to be a teacher. That's not exactly what I am, but I'm in that field, which is kind of interesting. So please let us know your name, your program of study, and then maybe what you thought you wanted to be when you were a kid, whether that's still true or not. As you are introducing yourselves, I do want to introduce our guest for today's session, Cecilia Moore. And she is coming to us today from the Calgary Youth Employment Center. Cecilia, would you like to say a bit about yourself?
Thanks so much, Beth, and thank you again for having me for a second round of Q&A. So my name is Cecilia Moore. I've been with the City of Calgary Youth Employment Center since 2002. Previously, I worked at another career service provider in a rural setting. So together, I have almost 25 years of experience that I've been working with in the field. My most recent experience, probably the last 10 to 15 years, has been specifically with post-secondary students. And I really love the career journey that post-secondary students are on. And always think it's such an honor to be able to walk beside somebody as they enter their career choices and move forward into that next transition in life. So I'm excited to chat about some of these pieces and provide any suggestions that I can offer, and look forward to continued work with Ambrose. I've been working with Ambrose now for the last almost 2 years, and excited to see students and meet students and to hear what you're looking forward to in this next stage of life.
Wonderful. Cecilia is often on our campus and does workshops, also meets with students individually, and she's also available digitally for one-on-one appointments as well. So we really appreciate her and her presence today. Today, we want to give you an opportunity to ask Cecilia your questions about the job application process. So at any point during our session, feel free to jump into the live chat with questions and comments and thoughts about the job application process. And we will make sure that Cecilia has an opportunity to address those questions as they come up. To get us started though, I've compiled a list of frequently asked questions focusing around a couple of key areas. And I'll bring those questions up for us. So there's kind of a couple key areas where we're going to focus. First, the core elements of a job application. What are the essential ingredients of a successful job application? And what are tips for using them well? Also, we'll talk a little bit about ways of applying for jobs. How is applying by email different than applying online? What do I need to know in each case? And then at the end, we'll also talk about other options for applying for positions. We'll start with a few of these frequently asked questions, and then we'll stop periodically to bring in your questions from the live chat. So please, we encourage you to get thinking about your questions and type them into the live chat. We will start with just a few of these frequently asked questions and then pause for any questions that you have. Let's start with the core elements of a job application. So we're probably all familiar with two major tools, the cover letter and the resume. But again, the application I submit for a professional position might be different than the application I submitted for my very first job. So let's start here and kind of refresh and kind of rethink the basics. In the coming weeks, Cecilia will actually be leading an on-campus workshop on how to craft your cover letter and resume, so she'll get into more details then. But let's start by asking a few kind of foundational questions to clarify. So do I really need a cover letter? What is it for? This is something that I've often heard people ask. Or sometimes people will leave a cover letter out of an application. So this is a good question. Second, what's the difference between a resume and a curriculum vitae? So I've heard this term CV or curriculum vitae. What's the difference? And then what are the major types of resumes and which ones are the most common? I'll turn that over to Cecilia.
Thank you so much. So we'll just go through the questions one by one. And again, feel free to pop into the live chat if you have any additional questions as I'm talking through these. So the first question really around the cover letter, we hear that all the time. Do I really need that cover letter? And so the short answer is that yes, you do need the cover letter, especially if it's for a professional career-based job. It's part of the professional application package. It's an opportunity really for you to expand and give additional details to the employer of information that they will see on your resume. You have to think of all of the tools that you're using, the cover letter, the resume, the interview, as opportunities to market yourself and the skills that you have. An employer will not just naturally know that, and they may not necessarily dig for that information. So it's a really great opportunity for you to give a great overview and summary of information that includes your education, your skills, something that would make you really well suited for that industry. So it is an opportunity for you to address those things in the cover letter. Keeping in mind, a cover letter should only be one page. It should be in business standard format, which I will talk about in the workshop in a couple of weeks. And really having an opportunity to talk about things that are very specifically tied and relevant to the actual job that you're applying for. So that covers question one in terms of the cover letter piece. Question two is really around the differences between a resume and a curriculum vitae, or what we call a CV. So we hear the definition used interchangeably. Some people will call it a CV, some people will call it a resume. There is a distinct difference between the two. A resume is a 2-page document, which really is a summary of your education, your work experience, and your skills. Where a curriculum vitae is really a summary, a document of everything that you have ever done. Often CVs are used in very academic-based settings. You might see that if you were looking to apply for a master's degree, that they ask you for a CV, in which case that is exactly what they want. They want something that really expounds on all the experience that you have and is an opportunity for you to really go into detail. A CV can be up to 10 pages, even 15 pages, I've seen them, because it is really that overarching document that includes everything, where a resume is really targeted document that is just 2 pages that is relevant to the exact position that you're applying for or the industry that you're applying for. The final question on this slide addresses the major types of resumes and then which are the most common resumes. So there is 3 types of resumes that we often see. The chronological, the functional, and the combination. So the chronological resume is what I would say fairly old school. We did see it very much used in the 80s and the early 90s, where it really is just a list of the jobs that you've had. There isn't a lot of detail. It doesn't explain necessarily what or how well you do those jobs. It really is just this summary document of these are the jobs I've had. A functional resume really focuses on the skills and the abilities that an individual has. So this is a really good resume for people who are just entering a field and they're brand new and they may not have a lot of experience. Or if you are just a new job searcher, just looking for your first job or even, your first job in your career. It's a good way to really talk about your skills and abilities, and the focus isn't as much on work history. The third option for a resume is a combination resume. And so the combination resume is really bringing forth the best parts of both of those resumes, both the functional and the chronological, it allows you to really talk about your skills, but then it also gives a good summary of the work that you've done. Most recently at the Youth Employment Center, we really focus on something called a targeted competency-based resume. And so what we really focus on there is really focusing on what are the competencies of the job in the field that you're applying for. And it could even be a customer service job or a restaurant job, or it could be, your first career job in accounting or more a counseling position, really focusing in on the competencies. And so it gives you an opportunity to really talk about the competencies or the skills that you have to do that job. And then instead of that chronological piece, it allows us to use a relevant experience piece, which pulls from using volunteer work, actual work experience, practicum or internship experience, because all of these we have found are valuable for post-secondary students to communicate to an employer about. So for post-secondary students who are transitioning into their career, I would say that competency-based resume, the targeted competency-based resume, is what we would recommend because we've seen the most success for that as you transition.
That's wonderful. Thank you. As students, you can learn more by checking out Cecilia's workshop in a couple of weeks, but also feel free to jump in at any point with questions in the live chat, and we're happy to kind of go into detail on something or clear up a question. So please feel free to continue jumping in. Let's look at our next set of questions. So if we know that we need to include a cover letter and a resume, that's a good start. But let's say we know that there might be some other materials that employers ask for. What other kinds of application documents might a job application require? And what do I need to know about them? And then also, are there any things I shouldn't include in my application? How about references? Do I include them or not? When do I include them? Do I write references available on request? So these are kinds of questions about what else might go into the application package. Cecilia?
Okay, so thank you so much. These are really great questions to delve into at this point. So we'll go again through these questions from top to bottom. And so the first question, what other kinds of application documents might I need? So sometimes we will see that an employer will ask for additional information, and it is important to really pay attention to what the employer is asking for. If there is no ask for additional information, then the standard format that you would apply with is your cover letter and your resume. If they ask you for something specific, you need to make sure that you are sending it. Otherwise, your application will be considered incomplete. And so those kinds of things could include a police clearance or a child welfare check, depending on what industry you're going into. They might ask you for a link to your portfolio or an e-portfolio. It could include things like a driver's abstract if you are going to be required to drive yourself or other people for your job. Depending on what kind of position it is, the odd time they may ask you for a transcript. If it's more administratively related, they might ask you for results from your typing tests or your computer skills to prove that you have those. So depending on the job will depend on what kind of additional information is required. And again, I can't stress enough that if it is asked for in the posting, you need to ensure that you are including that piece of information for the employer along with your resume and your cover letter. And often there'll be steps that will be in the job posting that will tell you on how to get those forwarded to the employer. So the next question then, is there things that should not be included in your application? And there definitely is things that we would say, stay away from them. So those are things like pictures or headshots, unless you are applying for an acting position or unless you are applying for, a modeling position. We would definitely say that pictures are not appropriate to include on your resume or in your application package. Again, unless it is asked for. even personal information that there's pieces of personal information that should not appear in your application. So those could be things like your social insurance number, your religious affiliations, your political affiliations, whether or not you have children, your race, anything like this are things that should not appear on your resume or anywhere in your application package. There's labor standards around and human rights standards around what an employer is allowed to ask about. And so some of these things that I referenced fall in that area, and they can't ask you about those pieces. And so I would encourage that you really focus on the pieces that should be in that resume document. The final question is should I include references in my application? And the resounding answer is no, you should not include those. Protect your references just as if you would be protecting your own personal information. If you are doing a job search, and especially in a labor market that is really difficult, you should be sending out between 20 and 30 resumes for positions every week. And so if you are sending out your references personal information or the information that they have provided you to use for an employer to contact them, you are basically giving the employer the right to reference check you before they have even met you. And so the appropriate time to bring those references would be at the time of interview, just on a separate sheet, have your contact information at the very top, and then have your 3 references listed on that sheet of paper. So again, I would say do not include them. You can just add on your resume references available upon request. It is very commonplace to do that, and you would not be out of line by handling it in that way.
Okay, a follow-up question then. Kind of thinking about those ideas of references, when I'm choosing my references, what should I think about? How should I choose? And then kind of a question about the whole application process. Let's say I have a strong resume and a strong cover letter. Is that enough to get me a job?
Okay. So when choosing your references, it is really important to consider who you're going to ask. We would always say stay away from using family or friends because they typically, unless you have worked for them, wouldn't be able to talk about your work self. And what I mean by that, you need to find somebody who can actually comment and speak about what you are like as a worker, what your skills are like, what your abilities are like. And that is what an employer who's doing a reference check is looking for. They want to know what you are like as a worker and how you will handle the job that you have applied for, and they need backup in terms of what you have said in your interview from a previous employer. So previous employers are obviously an easy one to go to. Again, I would say make sure that they can speak about the work that you're doing for them. For example, if you are applying for your first career job, but you've worked customer service the whole time through university, then you may want to use one of your past employers as a reference, but you might want to find an additional reference who can really speak about your career abilities. And so that could be somebody who supervised you at an internship or a professor who you have worked closely with during your time at university. So it really gives you that detailed information and the employer the opportunity to speak about your skills with your references. So we would always say have 3 references. So if you have 2 that are more professionally related who can speak to your skills, then the third person could be somebody who could speak about your character. So again, that could be somebody who knows you through different means, maybe somebody who you volunteered with, or a coworker, or even somebody who you've gone to school with. Again, trying to stay away from family and friends because they typically don't make the best references, and so that's how we would choose them. And really consider what can this person speak to when they are called for a reference check. So the final question on this slide, is a good resume enough to get me a job? I get that question and that comment quite a bit that says, well, I have a great resume, so I should be able to get a job, or I have a great resume and I don't know why I'm not getting a job. We have to think of job searching on a continuum, and that there's several pieces in that you need to use in order to secure the job. So the cover letter and the resume are just one piece of that job searching tool that you would use. The next piece is also the interview. It's all about self-marketing. And so really the resume and the cover letter are really there to market your skills in a way that the employer understands that you have the basic requirements that they are looking for, and hopefully a bit more than what they're looking for, enough so that they will call you for the interview. A resume doesn't get you the job. It's the interview and how you perform in that interview that will secure you that position. And so I find that often people spend so much time focusing on just the resume piece that they don't necessarily focus on that interview piece. And then that is where the holdup becomes, is that they need to do some practicing in terms of being able to do well in an interview as well. So it needs to be the complete package. And again, you know, our services at the Youth Employment Center or myself can assist you with practicing mock interviews as well, to make sure that you have all the components in your job search toolbox and ready to go.
So it is a really big and important process, and every step matters. Let's talk then for a little bit about the steps, or the kind of the ways that you might apply. And I mentioned off the top that most people in my field, in professional positions, don't actually want people to apply in person. They want people to apply by email, or they want people to submit through an online application system. Sometimes if they're asking candidates to submit through an online application system, they don't even accept certain kinds of documents, or they ask for additional information. So it's definitely different submitting by email versus submitting by that online application portal. So here again, we have a great opportunity to learn from Cecilia about kind of what the norms are and what we should expect, how we can best work to our own advantage here. So let's start with a few questions about if we're applying by email. So the very first thing that the recruiter is going to see is the subject line. So what should I write there in the subject line? Then how about the body of the email? Can I just use the body of the email as my cover letter, or is it something different? And then how should I format my attachments if I'm applying, or how should I submit my resume and cover letter and those kinds of things if I'm applying by email? Cecilia?
Okay. So those are some great questions as well. So what should you write in the subject line? It can be very simple. It really just needs to be the job title. And if on the job description or job posting, there's a reference ID or a job ID reference number, you need to include that as well. So if I was applying for a teaching position with the Board of Ed and the reference number was 1234, then all it would say is that I'm applying for a teaching position, reference number 1234. You could potentially include the company name as well, so that they are completely clear that you have applied to their company and to their job. So it can be very, very basic. The next piece is, what do you write in the body of the email? And that can be very simple as well. You really don't need to expand a lot of information, because that is what your cover letter is there to do. So all that you really need to put is that to say that you are asking them to please accept the attachments as your application, and then restate the job title and the job ID. Again, that's all that it needs to say. You can start with a salutation such as good morning or hello. It doesn't need to be dear sir, dear ma'am. It can just be very just welcoming in that way, and then sign off with your information. The one thing I do want to say is make sure that you are using an appropriate email address. a professional email address. I know that sometimes when we are young and when we are just developing email addresses, we might use nicknames or we may use funny terminology for our email address. But if you have an email address like that, I would encourage you to use one of the free providers, and like Gmail or Yahoo, and just create a professional email that's really strictly used for job searching. So then the next part of that question in question 2 was, how is this email different from the formal cover letter? It's the email is simply just letting them know that you are applying and that they are looking at your resume and cover letter. Your cover letter, again, as we spoke previously, earlier in the session, was you really are having an opportunity to expand your knowledge and your abilities to that employer. So the final question is, how should I attach format my attachments? Pardon me. So those should always be done in a PDF. Especially now that since COVID has hit, I've seen a lot of students come to me via obviously online ways, and we have to look at those documents as well in an online format. And so you need to know that not every business or company has an ability to open every different format that there is, or word processing document that is available. I know that Mac and Apple products don't always necessarily talk nicely to Word documents or Word environments, and so you need to make sure that what you're sending is something that can be easily opened, and a PDF allows you to do that. What I would encourage you to do is to include your cover letter and your resume in one document, if possible. If not, then have 2 PDF documents. This will also allow all your formatting to stay put and will ensure that the employer can actually open the information and view your information. So that would be how I would encourage you to attach it, always in a PDF.
All right, now let's think about the other main option. So if we are, say, applying through an online tracking system or an online application form, let's borrow Cecilia's wisdom here too. So we might end up asking questions like these ones. What is an application tracking system? How common are these kinds of systems? How does it work? And then how do I make sure that my application gets through any electronic screening process? Let's turn that over to Cecilia.
Oh, thank you, Beth. This is, I guess, relatively new to students from what I'm finding. I mean, it is something that human resource departments use quite often, especially in big companies. And so application tracking system, or an ATS, is basically used by human resources, and it's a software that basically is a database of its applicants, and it has a way of screening those candidates. I would say that it's most common in large companies, such as the tech sector, oil and gas, and financial sectors. Those is where you would see a really large company where they would be getting thousands and thousands of applications for their jobs. And so that is an important piece to think about. There is sometimes a screening tool that they will use on the outset. So they might use partial an ATS system, and then the second part is that it really is human eyes looking at it. And it does do good just to check to see what your industry that you're going into is using. So things like for our pastoral students here at Ambrose and our human services students, oftentimes it's human eyes that is looking at each and every resume. But for maybe our accounting students or our science students applying to really large organizations, you might be faced with one of these ATS systems. And so it's important that you understand how they work. So the next question really addresses that. How does the application tracking system work? And so basically, like I said, it's a software that pre-screens the candidates. And so the first thing that you might see is something that they call the knockout questions. So it might give you a screen before you can even attach and upload your PDF. It's really a set of questions that you need to answer. And if you answer them correctly, I hate to say correctly, but it is basically in the employer's mind the answers they're looking for, then you are able to upload your document. If not, you basically get declined. And so I have seen this happen with the City of Calgary. They do have those knockout questions. So this is in part something that they do use, is that they really try to understand, you know, is the person that is applying qualified for the job posting that we have? So if you don't make it, then you kind of get put in a, for lack of better words, a quarantine area, where a manager can still view your application, but often managers will only focus their time on the ones that have been screened through. It really is just a way of saving time when there's hundreds of applications coming through. So that is something that you need to know. It basically is a way of them to narrow down the pool. So the other thing about this software is that sometimes there's pieces of that software that will scan for competencies or for words that the employer has keyed into the system that they are looking for. And so this is where it's really, really important that your resume actually speaks to the skills and competencies that are in the job posting. Because if that scanning software is looking for those key competencies and words and they're not in there, again, you will move into that kind of quarantine section of the application, where you won't actually make it to the next piece. And so the other thing you need to know about that is that ATS systems do not like templates, and they do not like text boxes. The technology can't screen that information or can't read that information, and we do see that students really do like to use templates and text boxes. So we really encourage students always to use just a plain Word document and to type your information in there, so that if you are faced with an ATS system and it does screen for that information, for those competencies, that you will actually make it through, that your document will make it through the screen. So, and again, what those screens are looking for is really for the minimum qualifications that the employer has set out that they are looking for. And so that's something, I guess, that you really do need to think about, and that you're making sure that you really are taking the time to read the posting and to make sure that you really are qualified for the position that you are applying for. Are there any follow-up questions on that? Because sometimes it's a bit hard to describe.
Yeah. No follow-up questions in the live chat at this point. But if you are joining us live, please feel free to keep tossing your questions in. Let's talk about other options. Sometimes when we're applying for work, we're actually applying to a specific position. Other times, and if we're applying to a specific position, we need to customize our application to that position. But there are a couple of occasions where we might end up applying to a more broad app, or applying in a more broad way. For example, we pull up our slides again. We might consider using a job search application site like Monster or something like that, that allows us to upload a general application, a general resume, so that employers can kind of search through potential candidates without me necessarily even applying. So we might wonder, should I upload a generic resume on one of those job search websites? Does this strategy work? What should I know about it? And then the other case where we might kind of do a more broad application would be if we're applying to a staffing agency or a temp agency. And again, we might wonder, like, what exactly is that? And then when should I apply to one, and what should I know about that application process? Cecilia?
Okay. So let's look at that first question a little bit first. So should I upload a general resume on a job search website? So it is what I have had one client refer to as the spray and pray technique, where basically you are just canvassing everyone and everywhere and praying that you're going to get a call back. And so I would really say that it's generally not an effective way of job searching. Some concerns that I would have about uploading information in a public forum like that is that potentially you are opening yourself up even to things like identity theft, because your personal information is out there floating around, and you really, once you upload it, have no control over that information. And as we know that even when you pull information back, sometimes it still exists on the internet. And so I would really say, really focus in on a targeted job search, and it would be a more effective way to get to the end goal. So to answer the second part, obviously, does that strategy work? Sure, there is people who have had success with that, but I would say the majority of people don't necessarily have success with that. So what I would say instead is, if you are interested in using some sort of media to put yourself out there, then use a social media platform such as LinkedIn that is really, really set up for the professional job searcher, for you to be able to network and connect with people directly in the industry. And there you have control. You have control over who can see your information, who can't, who you accept, who you don't, and who you reach out to is going to be hopefully there for the right reasons. And so I'm not telling students don't do it. If it's something you feel comfortable with, I guess you could move forward. But I would say, just keep in mind of how will you keep track of your information, and where are you actually posting it, and where's that information going to. During this COVID period, we have seen a lot of fraudulent kind of activity in terms of job searching, where people are being connected or contacted, to say, oh, I found your information on this or this site, and then do you want this job? But then as they find it out, as they get into it, they find that really it's basically a crime that's being committed. And so I would say, I would caution you when using public forums in that way, because again, the control piece isn't as much there as I would like to see it be there. So the next question is around staffing agencies. What is it? When should I consider applying to one? And what are they looking for? So a staffing agency is basically a placement agency. And so they will do the pre-screening for the employer. So an employer will pay a fee to the staffing agency and might say, I need an accountant, or I need a financial analyst. And so then it is up to that staffing agency to find somebody who is in that field. So then if you are signed up with that staffing agency, they obviously have your resume, know your skills. They may have even completed some testing with you in terms of your abilities and your knowledge. And so then they would put you forward as a candidate. It is a good way to get shortlisted for opportunities, because so many jobs get hundreds of applications, and when an employer uses a staffing agency, they really typically are just using that agency to find a staff member for them. The one thing that I do want to say to you is that what is important to know is that there should be no cost to you as a job searcher at any point. So I want to stress that there should not be a cost to you. If the staffing agency is asking for a fee of some sort, then you really need to find out what that is about, because typically it is the employer that is paying for that service, not you as a job searcher. It should be free to you. make sure that the staffing agency is reputable, and you can do that research online. You can even contact the Better Business Bureau to make sure that there's no complaints that are launched against them. And so just to make sure that you really are protecting yourself and covering yourself. So when should I use a staffing agency? So there's good times that you could certainly look at using a staffing agency if you're looking for a short-term contract, or even if you are looking for full-time work, but it's a really competitive industry, a staffing agency is a great way to go. I would definitely say that as a job searcher, you might want to consider applying for more than one staffing agency if that's the route you choose to take, because not all agencies will have jobs at the same time or the kind of jobs that you're looking for. If you're looking for work like such as admin work or data entry, even labor work is something that lots of people apply to. And so again, it's a good way to get considered. So they are different from a headhunting agency. So headhunters definitely would try and source you out based on your skill set, whereas staff agency, you really are going to them and are presenting them with your skills, and then they look to place you. What are they looking for specifically? So staffing agencies really look for specific skill sets, so often computer skills and data entry skills. But I think the biggest thing is that you have flexibility. Often these staffing agencies are looking for somebody who is very flexible and has a very flexible schedule to be able to meet the needs of the employer. And so if you only have limited availability and time, a staffing agency may not be the best resource or tool to use, because they wouldn't necessarily be able to place you because of that limitation. So that's something that I would have you think about as well. Overall, I think staffing agencies are a great resource in the community. And I think you know, when you are looking for work, I think you need to be using every resource that's available to yourself in order to try and get your foot in the door with an employer.
Thanks so much for those great tips, Cecilia. Now we are coming to the end of our time. So I do want to thank everyone for participating today. If you have any last questions, feel free to type them into the chat and we'll pass them on. I want to take this opportunity to thank Cecilia again for her incredible wisdom that she shared with us. And I also want to encourage you to check out our next workshop on careers, where Cecilia will be speaking more about resumes and cover letters and going into a little bit more detail. So you can attend that session either in person or via Zoom. And you can sign up by visiting ambrose.edu/workshops. While you're there, you'll also be able to learn about all of our other workshops in other areas, whether it's academics or financial wellness. So I encourage you to check that out. Cecilia will also be available for a number of one-to-one consultations about resumes and cover letters. So be sure to contact us for more information. You can reach us at studentsuccess@ambrose.edu. You can also send us any questions there and we'll make sure that they get passed on in the right way. We are very grateful to you for being here, to Cecilia for being here as well. And we do want to encourage you to reach out if you have any questions. We hope you have a really great day and take care until next time.